All right. First of all, I want to thank all of you guys for coming out tonight. I know how busy everyone in this room is. There's a lot of people closing out Q3 and trying to get positions filled. So thank you guys for taking some time with us. This is actually the second of these that we've done. We did one on recruiting ethics back in late July, I think it was. And that's up on our website. Today, actually, we launched something on Entelo called Recruiter Academy. And it's going to be a growing source for information about cutting edge kind of tips and tricks and best practices and other things, and really hopefully the kind of preeminent online education platform for recruiters. So academy.entelo.com is the URL, and you can check that out, and we put all of our panels and webinars and white papers and all that good stuff up there. So we've got a really fun panel tonight, a really interesting panel, one that we could probably spend many hours talking about. Unfortunately, we only have 1 hour tonight, but what I want to do is kick off first by just letting the panelists introduce themselves and give you guys about a minute on who they are, their background, what their company is and does, and what their role is there. So, if you want to start.
I'm Arthur Yamamoto. I'm the engineering recruiting manager for Yelp. Not sure if you've heard of us. We connect people with local businesses.
What do you guys do again?
So we connect people with local businesses. We're currently at about 110 million unique monthly visitors to our website, with 10 million plus active mobile users, and now, as of 2 weeks ago, 23 countries, as we just launched in Brazil. And so I manage a team of recruiters who deal with everything technically oriented for Yelp. Myself, I started my career in iBanking before being on the agency side for about 8 years, and after that, moving to a startup, which I helped double and get acquired, got my options accelerated and paid out, and now I'm on to the new adventure at Yelp.
That sounds awesome.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Natalia, and as you can tell from my lovely accent, I'm not native here. I come from Russia. And I do product management at SmartRecruiters. That's a recruiting and hiring platform. It's an ATS plus, if you want to call it that way. But basically, we try to cater to all of your recruiting needs and the way you manage your hiring flow, and to make sure that your candidates flow in. I do product management there. Prior to SmartRecruiters, I was working for Get Going. That's a Y Combinator company. Revolutionizing travel industry, and I built a travel search engine and including airfare and hotels for them. Prior to that, I was doing my graduate school in Boston at MIT, where I was studying management and computer science. And before that, I was in my sweet home country, which is way colder than San Francisco, so whenever you complain about your weather here, I judge you guys. So that's me.
Fantastic.
So my name is Jason Lohrentz. In the recruiting world, I've been in the agency side of things, really small startups, worked at Google, and now I run recruitment for Shopkick. It's I guess you could call it like a shopping platform, like the future shopping platform to help find and discover and buy things in conjunction with the stores.
So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a little dialogue up here for about a half an hour and talk through some issues related to recruiting metrics, and then we'll turn it over to you guys to ask questions that you might have. So as you're listening to the panel talk tonight, be thinking of things that you might be interested in hearing from them. What I want to do is I want to kick off by asking a question of each of you, which is, what is the metric in recruiting that you find most interesting? Not necessarily like the most important to track, not necessarily the best metric, but like what is the one that like you think about a lot?
So there's definitely a lot of metrics that we track and that have various levels of importance. I think what's most interesting to me is something that more people are now starting to think about, which is quality of hire. Mm-hmm. And it's something that's been a lot easier to do at Yelp because at Yelp we do quarterly reviews. So we're able to track new employees' progress at 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. And generally what we do is just have the managers give a 1 through 5 score, and we'll just track that, for all our hires. And and obviously reverse engineer that through where the sources are, you know, how they're brought in, whether they're referrals or if they were sourced or you know, inbound candidates, and then just kind of break down the number from there.
That's fantastic. So we're gonna definitely come back to quality of hire, but Natalia, what's your metric?
You know, I don't really think about that in terms of metrics, and that's probably a horrible thing to acknowledge at
This is a metrics panel, you realize?
It's a metrics panel. But you know what, I just asked myself questions, and the question that I ask regarding the recruiting metrics is, where are my good candidates coming from?
Mm-hmm.
Not only, I think that it's really piggybacking on what you said about the quality of hire, but it's also related to the sourcing and like where do I find candidates?
Nice.
Jason, how about you?
Well, you guys stole all the best answers already.
So give us the
Next time.
third best
number
answer.
3 is going to be tough.
We'll reverse the order.
But I think definitely quality of hire is really good, and so where it comes from, the sources is pretty awesome, especially when you start talking about like where it's coming from social media and stuff like that is really interesting. You start seeing a lot of cool things there. I think a lot about like time and you know, when people get into the process to when they get an offer extended, and each step of the process. I'm pretty sensitive to that being like a really small company. The best way to compete against the Yelps and the Googles is just move so fast that they really can't even get an offer to the person even if they want them. And then I also really focus on the number of on-sites to hire. You know, if it's getting off, like something's wrong, you know.
Yeah.
But also quality of hire is super important. I stole that one.
I like it. I want to stay with you.
Okay.
And talk to me about, because we've had these conversations before around speed.
Yep.
So is your metric just purely from, you know, when you get the application to close, or do you actually track the speed at each stage of the funnel? Kind of talk to me, the group, a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So my average time from when I source somebody to when they say I'm ready to explore to offer accept is 3 to 5 days. And you know, it's different for everybody. You know, like some people may need more time because, you know, they just may need to think about it more, and you don't want to push them into something that isn't good for them. But a really interesting thing will start to happen, like right around, you know, under 3 days is too fast for the candidate. They're not ready. They haven't made their mind up. You're freaking them out. 3 to 5 days is great. You move so fast that almost nobody can compete with that. The average time, you know, most startups and companies will do is like maybe 8 to 10 days. You're just so fast and agile, you can get people through. Now, a really interesting thing happens around the 8th day. You source somebody who's passive. They get a message from you, I'm gonna explore this, talk to this guy, sounds kind of interesting. They in their mind, they're not leaving their job yet, you know, they're just exploring, you know. They talk to you, they're like, wow, this is really interesting. Hey, let's chat with someone from the team. And then they start chatting with the team and they're like, wow, this is really cool. And then you say, well, you know, we'd like you to come on site. And then they're like, everybody knows, oh, wait a second, I'm in a job interview. You know, it's like this is all happening so fast and it's all good and exciting, but they know instinctively after that they get an offer. So they have to make their mind up at that point and say like, if this is as cool as I think it is, will I leave my job? And at that moment they become an active candidate. And then they will start to be more likely to respond to past recruiters, look at what's going on out there. And then just in general, time will kill closes.
So the moral of the story for you is hire them before they become an active candidate.
Well, they all will become active candidates, sure. But you need to like try to get through the process before they have enough time to act a lot on that.
To realize that they're an active candidate.
Yeah, exactly. You know, because people want to just, you know, I don't want to take the first thing that comes. Is that a foolish thing? You know, what else is out there? I'm going to look on LinkedIn real quick. I'm going to talk to somebody real quick. And now your passive candidate has become an active candidate, and they got 4 offers. You're like, this is keep happening to me. So time to get them through. But you know, then again, you have to really play it by ear because it's a relationship game. You know, you could be an epic salesperson and convince anybody and brainwash anybody to do things, and then they'll get in your company, and 16 months later they'll leave if it wasn't the right opportunity for them. So you really have to play the time by ear to make sure the relationship and the decision is right. But in general, try to move fast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So Natalia, I want to go back to something you said around source being really important. And a question that I think we'll come back to a couple times tonight is how do you handle, kind of for lack of a better term, or how do you see companies handle, for lack of a better term, kind of dirty data or incomplete data? So, sources get marked incorrectly, they don't get marked at all. Source is important, but obviously it's not always done accurately. So what do you see kind of in terms of best practices or pitfalls around that?
That is actually a great question, because I think that the area of defining the sources of hire is being reshaped right now, because as Jason pointed out, I think social media has started to play a bigger role in that. So a lot of people actually add, social media as an important recruiting and hiring source to their, metrics that they track and measure. I'm seeing that a lot of people track, so to say, organic hires. So basically something that, you post a job on your own website and you don't have to pay any money for it. They also track basically paid sources, such as postings on LinkedIn or, Staff Overflow careers and things like that. Social media is that one area which I think is really emerging right now, and I'm seeing more and more of SmartRecruiters customers getting interested in tracking that, and actually, seeing connecting how well they perform in social media with how much candidates they're getting because of their social media activities, be it blogs, be it tweets, be it Facebook group activity. Finally, people always care to know about their recruiters and how those are performing, and I think that recruiters and databases such as your product, I think, being another important candidate source.
What I want to do as much as we can in tonight's panels, I figure, what's the actual metric that's being tracked? So is it like we had 6 hires per 1,000 tweets about us? I mean, like what is the actual calculation that's being done by these customers?
This is the magic here happens on the on the end of the overlap of recruiting metrics and social media metrics. So you can tell how many candidates came from a tweet or your blog post or something else. And then you can connect, you can take a more holistic approach and look at those metrics together with your, for example, spendings on promotion and social media. And then that can give you a very interesting picture. A lot of customers, I have had feedback sessions with recently said that they use our product, SmartRecruiters, to see if their advertising in social media is performing well, because if you get your name out there all the time in social media, then as a result you get more candidates applying to you in a natural way. More people come to your website and apply there. So that's a very interesting edge, which I think is yet to be defined. But I think, and I'm wondering what you guys will have to say about it, but I think that's one trends we're seeing.
Yeah, I'd love to piggyback on this, because really what you're talking about is controlling the message of employment branding across all the social media channels. And it creates a buzz. It answers the question, what's it like to work here? Why are we different? What's the adventure? And really the biggest metric where that hits down is close ratio, actually. When somebody's really hitting social media hard and controlling those messages and getting the right information out to people that they need to make a decision and to create a buzz about things, that will directly hit the core.
What's your definition of close ratio?
Just the amount of people that say for instance your engineering org, what is the percentage of people that you're closing off of X amount of offers or something like that.
So basically it's offer to close.
Yeah.
Acceptance.
Yeah.
Do you guys use any other metrics to track close ratio? Is there anything done we got this number of quality candidates in the pipeline, and you mentioned speed, right? So if your pipeline was let's say your time to close was like 6 weeks instead of 3 to 5 days. My guess is the number of offers, because people would fall out at certain points. So do you track anything else related to close ratio, or is it just offers to acceptance? And that's a question for any of you guys, if you guys have a metric around that.
Well, before we get to that, one thing to note again before we get too far off this topic of employment branding, like when you have a really strong employment brand like Facebook, Google, Twitter, that will adjust how fast the candidate has to get through the pipeline. Because when they're so excited about something, they'll put up with a 3-week, 4-week, 2-month hiring process. So that's another reason why it's important. And other things you track with close ratio is just, I guess it's a lot more competitive information I use a lot, like what is Yelp? What Facebook, $100,000 sign-on bonus, what the hell? It's like...
Wait, $100,000 sign-on bonus?
Yeah, and so I use a lot of other competitive intelligence. So when I make offers, I have a better guesstimation on what's the close ratio with this person, so I know what kind of offer to give them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Arthur, how do you guys think about close ratio? Or go a different direction if you want to.
Just take 2 steps back to your original question on dirty data. That's something that
for sure.
kind of resonated with me. And what I found is that, speaking on that, is that I haven't found a good way to do data accuracy other than to just do it the old-fashioned way, which is when the candidate comes aboard, how did you get to us? And I've found that a lot of the metrics that we're able to pull from our ATS or other sources is inaccurate, because a lot of times, we spend a lot of money on LinkedIn and then we won't see enough applications there. We think we're not spending, we're spending the money in the wrong places. But truth be told, a lot of times people see the job ad on LinkedIn or somewhere else, and their first instinct isn't to apply there, it's to go to the website, find out more about the company. And so we have the most hits through our careers page. But when you reverse engineer and you talk to the people who come in, they're actually saying that they saw the initial posting on X or Y. And even the folks that come in through LinkedIn, and I know this has happened quite a bit recently, is that they'll apply through LinkedIn connecting to one of our recruiters first, but when we ask them how they got to us, it's really through a lot of meetups that we host. And so we host Python meetups, Java meetups, different things, and people come in, we do a lot of soft recruiting there. Then people reach out and connect on LinkedIn, and then they'll find a job ad there or wherever else, or they'll just Google a job ad or go to the career site. But it's really the event itself that brought the people in. But there's no way for us to track how many people were hired from an event other than to individually ask every candidate, how did you get to us? And that's kind of part of our process, is when we have that initial conversation is, how'd you find us? How'd you get to us? As far as kind of the close ratio stuff.
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that? Are you having when you're on a phone screen, you're asking them?
Yeah, the initial phone screen. Well, our process, the initial call is always with the recruiter, and that's part of the process that I put in there is just find out. That's the first thing we want to find out. How'd you get to us? And then you'll find a lot of different dirty data, as you say, because the ATS may tell you they came in through LinkedIn, or the career page, but it's really they saw the ad somewhere else, and they did some more research. So.
Anybody who's worked in a big, gigantic organization who's dealt with dupes in your ATS, that's just a nightmare. It's like who's got...
Define dupes, just in case, for anybody out here.
For some reason, the same person is in the ATS multiple times. Maybe they applied to multiple jobs, or they've gone through the interview process more than one time, and they just have multiple records, multiple lead records, multiple ATS records, but it's the same person. Or they've been rejected, and then they change their name, and they try to reapply again because nobody's going to catch them. Sure. And so it's just like cleaning up the data from dupes is pretty tedious. So you really need to put it in there correct, like a lot of good notes, and it takes a good culture to just train your recruiters to put it in there right. So when weird things happen, you can associate certain clues to figure out this is probably the same person, like the school they went to, jobs they were at, awards they won, even ways that they write sentences, like this is probably the same person, even though, the first name is not John anymore, it's now Tim or something.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said, started off the conversation with, which you said, and I think all of you said that this was important, quality of hire. So you mentioned that at Yelp, you guys have the performance reviews, you get numbers. Or first of all, is that the only metric that you use on the quality side to determine, or do you look at other things? Like for example, if you hired a sales rep at Yelp, would their performance on sales also factor into that quality per hire?
That's a great question. It's one I can't answer, just because of the structure, the way
Sure.
Yelp is built, and just to kind of give you some transparency, our recruiting organizations are aligned to the specific business.
Mm-hmm.
So sales has a separate recruiting unit. I run the engineering unit, and then we have G&A who does everything else. So my reporting chain doesn't go through HR; it goes through the VP of engineering.
Gotcha.
But as far as kind of the quality of hire, I think a lot of it is the performance, and it's performance versus cost of hire.
Mm-hmm.
Cost of hire is something that is an evolving metric as well, right? Because the easiest way to do it right now is all your ATS expenses, all your posting expenses, and then you divide it by how many hires you made in the year, right? What we're working on now to go a step deeper than that is to actually calculate the interview time. How much each interviewer, which engineers are using, what's their salary, what's their hourly component that is being used. And there's a lot of data for engineers that states that it's a huge cost for them to even lose an hour in the day because engineers need to work in long blocks, right? It's the cost of cutting into a 6-hour block of coding time is huge.
Yep.
And it's not necessarily calculated by the hourly rate at which they work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that we're trying to figure out the metric on. So the cost per hire is something that is kind of an always evolving metric as well.
Would it be fair to say that most recruiting organizations vastly underestimate their cost per hire because they don't factor that in?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think I've worked in organizations where it's literally we spent this much on postings, we hired X amount of people, that's it.
Yeah, it's $2,000 to hire.
Yeah,
Actually.
and there's just a huge expense, and one of the things that Yelp now does is we have maker days, which are engineering days that they are not to be involved in any kind of recruiting activity, any kind of meeting, just so that they have 2 days in the week that are full on, heads down coding, no interruptions. And that makes it difficult to recruit, right? Because now your interview days are only Monday, Wednesday, Friday. One thing that Jason mentioned, his kind of source to hire time being that short. I'm very envious of that. I've been in organizations and startups where the last startup that I was at, we've done source to hire in 72 hours before. Hired, myself personally hired 98 people in 10 months. But the difference is when you're looking to hire 60 or 100 people a quarter, you just can't move that quickly because the amount of time that it actually takes to interview that many people, we're at a point now where we're running out of people to interview. There's just not enough hours in the day. So we have a big college rush coming in. And the rush before that is to train new employees to be able to interview. Just so we have enough interviewers, and the bandwidth of the interviewers dictates how many schools that we can do college recruiting at, how many industry hires we can make in the quarter, because there's only so many hours to interview. And obviously you have an idea of how many interviews it takes to get to a hire after a while. So there's certainly a metrics-driven component to it, but at the end of the day, I think a lot of metrics lie.
Yeah.
Right? So.
Yeah. How do you guys think about quality hire? What's anything else to add to Arthur's thoughts?
Yeah, the cost per hire is important to know, definitely, but what trumps that is the opportunity cost of not having that person.
Mm-hmm. How do you measure that?
You can't solve the solution.
But there would be potentially, depending upon what the role is. Like you could measure. You don't hire a salesperson. That might mean you don't do $100,000 in revenue this quarter.
Exactly.
So that actually could be tangible.
Yeah.
Marketing potentially, engineering maybe less so. Is that fair?
Yeah, totally. One of the main reasons why I went to Shopkick actually is the culture of recruiting is different from place to place. Startup, agency, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. everybody kind of knows what's up, but they all have a different type of culture and how they do recruiting, and those kinds of constraints radically have big differences on the amount of success you have as a personal recruiter. You could take the same recruiter and put them in different orgs, and the culture of recruiting in those orgs is so important. You know, what kind of constraints are you against? So, you know, when I went to Shopkick, they said hiring is paramount. It's our most important thing. You know, you know, they really got into it, that like we'll do anything to make sure we get the highest quality person as fast as we can. And it may not be the most cost-effective thing sometimes it is, but the opportunity cost of not having the right person there in the long run is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. Natalia, how about quality of hire? Any other thoughts you have?
I think that Jason has started a really good point, which is that when we think about a quality of something, we most likely think about two sides of the problem, one being benefits and other being costs. So on the benefit end here, we're talking about how good that candidate is. And there are different ways to measure that. So I tend to think that, you know, if we're talking about just sourcing, to me a candidate is good enough if I care to interview them. If we go deeper and you know, look at, you know, later stages, like how well do they perform, how many candidates do we hire out of all the candidates who applied for a position, then this may add up to that side of the problem. And within SmartRecruiters, we also have an option of giving candidates a rating. So basically, whenever you interview a candidate or you review their resume, you can assign a rating from 1 to 5 stars to that person. And that would basically take that data, and based on that data, would calculate your average rating, for example, for sources, because some sources tend to give you better candidates at larger amounts, so you know that that's a better way to spend your money. On the cost side, I think it's really important, as Arthur pointed out, to measure something that is not being properly measured in most organizations, which is time spent on hiring processes. And on that end, to me, important metrics are actually, yes, time to hire, cost per resume, cost per interview, and cost per hire. And where possible, those costs should include both the money you spent on ATSs, interviewing people, you know, like various expenses, job postings, recruiters, and things like that, but also the actual, you know, evaluation of time that people, the worthiness of time that people actually spent interviewing other people, interviewing candidates. And that's a big challenge for SmartRecruiters as a company, because we relied on data that you guys give to us, and incentivizing people, giving you data, and making sure that the data is always up to date and that it is actually valid is one of the biggest challenges. So, like, for example, how do you make sure that, you know, like whoever the interview is, you know they're precise? How do you estimate their time? Right? How do you just take their salary and then break it down into an hourly rate, or? So
there, like I said, it's a constantly evolving metric.
Exactly.
It's something that we've tried to look at by an hourly rate. Is that accurate? When you look at, you know, the various articles about an hour in the middle of the day isn't really just an hour in the middle of the day, right?
Absolutely.
So,
yes.
So it's something that's, you know, I can't say that we've found the perfect way to calculate that.
Yeah, and I'm not really sure either how to you know, find a perfect way of calculating that, and more so how to encourage people to provide that data. But that actually brings us back to your point about dirty data and how you deal with this. So you not only you don't have control over external data sometimes, but, you know, just getting to understand how you can make internal data and also dirty can be tricky.
And I think when it comes to opportunity costs, I definitely believe the importance of it. And I think a lot of times the companies understand the opportunity cost. Whether that means they're willing to act on it is a completely different story, right? Because you can say the opportunity cost of not hiring this person is going to be $20K, but the candidate needs $15K more to accept the offer. but that may not, your hiring managers may not be willing to do that, right? And the response is generally from a hiring manager perspective, find me someone else who's willing to take that salary and find it tomorrow.
That's a terrific point, and I think the smaller the company, the more challenging it is to calculate an opportunity, the cost of opportunity of losing a person, because startups they just have fewer people, therefore whoever, and John, I'm sure you can relate to that, and so whoever, like the new person that you take in, they will be responsible for a significant portion of the business, and in some cases they can make it or break it. And so how do you calculate that? I think when you are a large organization, you can make certain assumptions that will lead to reasonable evaluation, but when you're a small company, I think it's very, very challenging.
No, completely agree. How do you guys translate or think about translating some of these recruiting metrics into dollars? So, at the end of the day, like for example, that's a great, segue into this question. You don't make that hire, that's going to cost you $500,000 in lost value. Do you guys take any of the metrics that you have, that you're looking at as you look at your dashboard, ATS and everything, and actually actively try to work and say, if you do it this way, this is going to be, a $100,000 net gain to the company? Because if without that, sometimes the decision makers won't be able to act in the right way because they don't know the dollar impact of doing things one way versus another. What do you guys think about that?
I'd like to jump on that one.
Yeah.
I don't think about that because I don't have time. I'm too small of a company to really, because you can really get in the weeds of data, metrics and data, and then forget to source.
Yeah.
And I'm not hiring anybody. Bigger companies probably can look at that stuff and find data, but I have to move so fast, and I can only really focus on the metrics that makes me successful while still being able to hire. So it's different between small and big companies,
Yeah. So big company guy. Biggest on the path.
Yeah. So just to take a step back, I think the brand is big. From an engineering perspective, we're a pretty small organization.
Sure.
We're including interns, 250 people, right? And that's everyone that touches anything that plugs in. So we're not Facebook, we're not Google. We don't have thousands and thousands of engineers. I actually might disagree with Jason there, because when I was at a smaller company, it was easy for me to get the metrics on, because the previous company I was in did mobile banking, and not glamorous name or anything like that, but if you use the Bank of America mobile app, that was our product. We did 1,200 different banks. So we have most of our technologists work on specific clients. So to not launch a project has an actual dollar value. So if we can't get another iOS developer to work on Zion's Bank in Utah, there's this much cost that we're losing. So it was very easy to pull that data, whereas Yelp is a sales-driven revenue business, so it's a little different to quantify how much value each engineer can add, right? Because we can add a new feature that puts up pictures in a different way and it's more attractive, but what does that actually translate into dollars? It's harder to figure that part out. So it's actually been a little tougher for me to track in a larger company, and that was probably the biggest thing I struggled with coming into a larger organization, was that there are a lot more moving parts and a lot of different things that don't add value tangibly, but make the company run.
Right. So, for example, you could try to quantify the cost of a bad hire. So, Yelp hires an engineer. That engineer doesn't work out. He leaves the company after 90 days. Do you actually try to do any of that stuff and say, when your team is interviewing, to say, if we make a mistake here, this is going to cost the company $200,000 or whatever the number is, or is that not really something?
I think it's something that I look at. It's not something that I communicate to the team that, hey, you blow this deal, you got this. Are you sure about the culture fit here? Because you're going to cost us $150,000 if that goes sour. So it's not something that I think that is. I don't think it's important for recruiters to look at those things. I think that's something that the organization as a whole needs to look at, because it's not. As much as engineering managers would like to point it that way, it's not always the recruiter's fault, right? We're not the one who's doing the coding evaluation. We're gauging for softer skills, we're gauging for a culture fit, but at the end of the day, I'm leaning on my engineering manager or the interview panel to tell me, yeah, he's a bang-up coder, or I'd really like to work with this guy. And there's always instances where maybe you didn't feel that great about it, but the candidate did a lot better than you would think he would do. And they move on and they hire him, and it goes sour, and it's kind of your fault because you were the one who hired him. But our role in a lot of ways is to kind of shepherd him through the process, not necessarily be the decision maker, right? So it's something the organization needs to look at and think about how we interview more than just how we source.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I have a ton more questions for the panel, but I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions. So.
Yeah, so just on that topic, is anybody on the panel or in this room doing anything to quantify quality of hire based on the interviewers that said this person's great and turned out not to be great? Are you guys doing anything to measure the interviewers that maybe consistently give the green light to folks that don't necessarily turn out so well?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's something that we're constantly looking at, is to make sure that the interviews are always calibrated. Because you always have, and that's something that you always have to look out for in an engineering org, because you have, what I found a lot of times is you have junior guys who want to be the stumper, right? Their interest isn't helping the company grow. Their interest is in interviewing and proving that I know more than the person that I'm interviewing. So they're out there to gun them. It's like, oh yeah, this guy doesn't know anything. Meanwhile, you have everyone else who's like, yeah, he was actually quite a strong developer. And so we the way we kind of submit the feedback is always through like a 1 through 5 number. And if there's a huge outlier, it's something that we always come back to, calibrate, make sure. And we're tracking the interviewers on if they're constantly the outlier. Maybe that person has to be taken out of the process, however sensitively that needs to happen, depending on their level in the org, I guess. But yeah, it's something that we track, and it's something where, one being a poor hire, 5 being a great hire. Sometimes you'll know that a 3 from John is really a 5, because he never gives 4s or 5s. So if he gives a 3, the guy must be God's gift. If he gives a 4, then forget what everyone else says. We need to hire this guy.
I'm sorry, but are they submitting their scores back, or are they submitting their scores during a feedback session where they can be influenced by?
No. So they don't have access to anyone else's feedback. We never do that. We don't want anyone to go into any interview with preconceived notions of how the person is doing. And we actually try to, frown upon even saying, how was the guy, before you go in there. I'm sure there's some of that still happens. We can't control all of that, but yeah, I think we always try to make sure that each person's opinion is kind of in a vacuum and done separately.
I have a question about something that's a little closer to the top of the funnel. So I do a lot of sourcing, and folk wisdom, or just common sense kind of dictates that you want to be very personal when you reach out to people if you can, right? But there's also an opportunity cost to getting very personal, because you can spend several hours reading someone's blog and finding out everything about them and getting into the realm of being creepy, right? So one thing that I'm very curious about is how much personalization is just enough? Where is that magic area where the 2 lines intersect?
Yeah, so this is a great question. Definitely the more personalized you do the message, the more personalized you do the outreach, even the way you do the outreach in a more personalized way. Hey, have this guy introduce me. That's so personal. They're gonna respond to you, hopefully. But I would say, just kind of rule of thumb, smaller the better, because you got to realize most of these people are looking on their smartphones. They're not pulling up your message on their computer at work. So you don't, I would say a couple sentences, max. They're not these big, huge things with job descriptions, and then at the end, tell me if you know any of your friends, and that stuff. Nobody reads that stuff.
and I'll pop in here because we've talked about this internally as we scale the team at Entelo, and we're actually tracking a metric which is amount of time spent per response, and eventually that'll be amount of time spent per positive response. So at the end of the day, you can A/B test, and you can say, when I send that long personalized email, it takes me 10 minutes and I get X number of responses, and when I send the shorter email or the less customized email, it takes me 2 minutes and I get Y number of responses, and you can just do the math on that. And so it'll ultimately be that it takes you 67 minutes to get a positive response this way and 42 minutes to get a positive response that way, and that'll kind of tell you, I think, which direction to go. So we've been incorporating that small sample size, admittedly, but that's what we've been looking at Entelo.
And I just want to add to that, we studied that problem from a different angle, so from a perspective of candidates applying for jobs and attaching cover letters or not, because a lot of our clients actually ask that same question: how much energy and how much effort do you need to spend while sourcing for candidates? And I think these are comparable processes, because as a candidate, you also you keep applying for jobs. If you're applying for multiple jobs, you wonder how much of personalization and how much time do you have to spend on the company's blog reading about what the company did, and how much details you need to mention. And in fact, based on the customers' feedback in that area, very few candidates actually provide cover notes, like fewer than you would think. I would say that under a third, like under 30%, which is kind of ridiculous, because in most cases people expect to receive some cover note. And same thing with the sourcing. Only about under 30% like sourcing cover notes and messages are personalized properly. And I think Jason is absolutely correct that not only it has to be personalized, it has to be very concise, because if you don't get me at your first paragraph, you never get me, because I just won't read any further. So I think whatever you say in that first paragraph carries the most weight, because people may check it on their mobile phones if they're not interested in the first few lines. Then
Actually, even more important, that is the title. If they don't click into your message, you've lost them.
that's true.
Does anybody split test their titles? You do. All right. Do you use a tool to do it, or do you just do it on Yesware? Cool. Yeah, that's a good. We've used Yesware for some stuff. That's a good.
I think the personalization is always such a fine line, right? Because and I say that because we had this hilarious incident where someone tried to recruit an unknown shop in LA, tried to recruit our VP of engineering, and sent the most intense recruiting pitch I'd ever seen. She knew his dog's name, the last 3 concerts he went to, had pictures of him, like literally pasted them, knew everything about him, but apparently didn't do enough research to know that he's also our CEO and founder's brother. So the odds of him leaving the company are, 0.
His last name Stoppable?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So it's basically his family business. He's not leaving it. But it was like an incredibly creepy email. And it's, of course, we passed it around to everyone in recruiting. I'm sure she got 20. This person looked at your LinkedIn profile, because we all just jumped on it. We're like, who is this person? Who would write this email? But so that that making sure that your data is accurate as well, because I know we oftentimes if you're recruiting mass candidates, you may make a typo, and it's that email is lost, and you forgot to change Cisco to Google, and that's done. It's messed up, right? So it's something that's difficult. I think what we've had a lot of success with at Yelp, and I hesitate to give kind of our secrets, but we have a lot of our managers send the emails out, and we'll actually create the templates. High value candidates, and they'll add a personalized touch. They'll look at the profile, and the response rate on those are amazing. We have a lot of folks who really respond positively to that. And it doesn't have to be your CEO. It's just another engineer saying, come talk to us. I'm not going to be the one in your process, but you should come talk to this recruiter, because we're doing some really exciting stuff, and it's meaningful. So I think there's a lot of tired ears, right, for recruiting, because all the best candidates, I'm sure everyone who's a recruiter here reached out to. There's probably some Kevin Bacon candidate that we've all reached out to and tried to recruit, who's tired of getting the pitches. Yeah, you know, there's those guys. So to come at it from a different way is really important. That's cool.
Do you guys use close ratio to either kind of give you a sense of where the market's going? So for example, like we're going into a hotter market or the market's cooling off because our close ratio is getting better or worse. And then I guess it's kind of secondary, similar question is, do you use it to predict the health of your own company? Of like, say, gosh, we're closing a lot more customers now than we were a year ago, like we must be doing really well. Or we're actually, our close rate's slipping, like maybe we're slipping in the marketplace. Do you guys think about things in that way?
Yeah, a little bit. What I like to use it for mainly is to take it back to the decision makers and tell the story with data and say like, I don't know if the offers we're making are relevant now. They were 6 months ago. Are they relevant now? You know, Shopkick is actually pretty morally fair about the offers they give. Everybody is pretty consistent, but it's definitely something to be aware of because, you know, you need to be competitive to the market.
And question, because you set an interesting spot where you guys could see, at SmartRecruiters, you guys could see data. Have you guys ever, like obviously all anonymized, but have you guys ever thought about or actually published like a trend of like, oh, we're seeing offers go up or down, or close ratios go up or down? I mean, or do you guys just say that's customer data, we're not ever going to like do anything with that data, even if it's anonymized?
No, I think no. So we definitely are. It's a great question. Basically, hit the bullseye. We're thinking about all the data that we own because of the all the information that we get from our customers, and we think that our customers collectively can actually benefit from an anonymized industry data, because as Jason was pointing out, like sometimes it's really interesting to compare yourself against the industry and say, hey, so how am I doing? Because you can compare yourself against your, as you said, delta. Like you can look at delta and compare yourself against internal benchmarks. For example, how much money did I spend per hire last year, and what's that number now? But also at any given moment, you want to know, okay, so it takes me 8 days to close a hire. Is this, how am I doing in comparison with my industry? Am I doing better than most people, and I'm like, am I on the cutting edge, or am I actually not doing it right because I'm slower than most people? And these are the sort of questions that I think would be really cool to answer for our customers. So I think in one of the iterations of our analytics product that we're launching in a few months, we're going to add basically something that we're calling industry reports, and a functionality that will not only tell you where you are now, but also how are you doing against industry, where you would be able to select, okay, so show me averages for like average cost per hire for high-tech industry in San Francisco, California for engineering function, where the level will be between 2 and 5 years. And then you can look at your own data and say, okay, so this is where I am. And then you can come to your founders and say, hey, you guys, this is the data. So,
I personally don't know that the close ratio is an indicator of the health of your business as much as the health of the industry and the competitors as a whole. I can't say that our close ratio has been better since our stock shot up, right?
Sure.
It hasn't been. But you start to see certain companies that you didn't think were a factor, and then when you lose 3, 5, 6 candidates to them, you're like, okay, well, now you do a little research and you realize they have another, $40 million in funding or whatever it is. So I think it's a bigger indicator of the health of the market itself. I personally wasn't at Yelp pre-IPO, but just looking back and kind of getting anecdotal data, the biggest delta is probably going public and pre-IPO.
Sure.
And that's kind of a mental thing out here, right? People want to be pre-IPO. Going public certainly gives the company a lot of stability. There's still a huge upside, but I think in Silicon Valley, the mentality is now you've missed the boat to become a millionaire. And there's only so many opportunities to do that, but everyone still wants to chase that. And so I think the health of our competitors is something that I'm always monitoring. And I'm often surprised by what companies pop up on my radar. And You know, you have shocking companies that you've never heard of that are doing thermostats, and you realize that they're valued at 800 million and they just got another 80 million in funding, or you know, some other niche product that you don't think about, that you don't think engineers would find exciting, but because they're pre-IPO, because of their valuation, they're able to pull some people in. And if of course they throw boatloads of equity.
Yeah. No, interesting. Any other questions? We've got a few more minutes left.
Have you ever analyzed the data or the metrics of how many submittals to phone interview to on-site to hire, and then attempt to refine the process if it's crazy town on how many it takes to get that hire?
You're like, let's talk about passive candidates, not so much active candidates. So, you know, if it's 100 to 1. That's a pretty healthy statistic. You source and reach out in the correct ways to 100 people. If you're an effective recruiter, you should get 25 or 30 responses. Average recruiters get 7 to 15% response out of 100. You're doing pretty good if you get above 20. So let's say 25 people respond. You talk to them on the phone. Not a culture fit. They're crazy or whatever. You cut a couple of them. You route to the manager. By then you'll know the rec. Let's say 20 will get approved. Goes to the first phone call. 10 will drop off, about 50%, and then about, you know, let's say 10 come on site and you'll get 1 hire. So it's right around 100 to 1. Now that's not totally true for every role. Salespeople could be a lot lower than 100 to 1. Niche roles, who's the dark fiber expert in the world, that could be 1,000 to 1 reach outs. But so the level of complexity, you know, changes that funnel to hire ratio.
I meant more from not sourcing, but total number of who's coming, candidate flow, and an effort to refine so that the interviewing panel's time, my time, or not, it doesn't take 50 submittals to get that higher.
Yeah. Well, you should, the really important one to do the spell check on is the on-site. Right around your 3rd on-site, you're going to start getting a lot of important information about why they didn't make it. You can start to refine things with your team there. If you're getting more than 10 on-sites to hire, something's a little bit off. You know, like maybe the role isn't written correctly, the sourcer isn't bringing in the right people, that the interview panel isn't that good. Who knows? Like, but what do you think after 10?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that metric, which is important, and you know, beyond just the actual flow and breaking it down is the time gaps between, right? Not all of us can move as quickly as Shopkick can. So there are candidate drop-offs at certain parts of the process, which may not be due to recruiting, right? So that's something that has to be monitored. But yeah, I think you always have to kind of analyze those numbers, because at the end of the day, everyone wants to work smarter, not harder, right? So you know, you want to figure out a way to break that down. But like Jason said, I mean, 10 would be a pretty reasonable number, and it's still, you know, it's still a war of attrition, right? You still have to get enough irons in the fire to make it work, especially in this kind of market where likely, like I said, we're all after some of the same candidates.
And that rough kind of 100 to 1 thing's a good kind of benchmark, because then you can use that kind of metric to know when to build your org. You know, you get 20 roles. Okay, I think this is going to take, you know, 20 times 100 reach outs. How many reach outs do I make a day? You know, how long is it going to do oh my God, you know, I need more people, you know? So that's a good way to tell the data when to start growing your org, you know. Also, the type of metrics you use dictates a lot on how you do your recruiting. Like if you're measuring certain types of statistics like that, that's very much pointing at the spray and pray approach. Reach out to a lot of people and we'll get some hires. There's other ways of doing recruiting, like experiments. Like Box does a lot of cool experiments. Other companies do a lot of cool experiments where these metrics that we're talking about means nothing. University recruitment is different. Referrals is different. Agencies is different. So the type of metrics you're measuring will start pointing you at a certain type of hiring. So you need to be aware of that.
What would be an example of an experiment? I mean, you don't have to share anything you can't share, but like,
yeah.
I'm fascinated by like, what do you mean?
Drinking meetings.
What's that?
Drinking meets. You want to hire hundreds salespeople in 3 months. You know, send out a blast amount of reach outs to say, come party with us. Mm-hmm. People show up. You talk to everybody, mainly with salespeople. It's like, really, like, who are you? Like, what's your personality type? I like you. Here, we want to mm-hmm. interview on Friday. Get 50 people together. Get your interviewers in line to like do this for real. Speed, go through everybody. Have all your decision makers there. Do it right. I've heard tremendous success.
It's like that. Speed recruiting.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of good success for sales recruiting and that sort of experiments. There's all kinds of different experiments you can run. It's really like you should be running lots of experiments. If your org isn't running a lot of experiments, other orgs are going to pass you by, and they're going to hit an experiment that does really well, and it's like, so you should always be doing experiments. And if you're just looking at it from that one type of metric, it's hard to know. You know, I guess the best metric is in experiments is how many people are you hiring, and then when you run these experiments like a scientist against a control group and multiple times, then maybe you can start formulating metrics on your experiments.
I mean, it's very similar to how the best run marketing organizations run their business, right? So the best marketers in the world are just, you know, scientists who are just experimenting and saying, you know, we do this here and this here and this here and this here. We get our numbers back and we double down in the areas that are working, and we hope that we find something that you know, we discover before everybody else does, because then we can really leverage that. Yeah.
I think I just really want to build on that. I think it's really important to slice and dice your data, because when we're talking about metrics, if you're talking about you know, one set of metrics across the entire organization or unit or whatever you're thinking about, you're going to be able to filter that data, because, for example, 2 different recruiters will have 2 different approaches, and somebody will, you know, experiment and, you know, try to hire people faster just because of their personality and, you know, natural ability of, you know, make really good decisions about candidates. And someone will take a different approach and, you know, spend more time, but, for example, spend less time from, you know, with other people or something like that. So you really have to be able to slice and dice your data and say, okay, so this is how long it takes me to hire a person in this department. This is how long it takes each of my hiring managers to hire a person for that type of a position. So I think that if we're talking about just one set of metrics, it's never enough. It's like, you know, coming to a hospital and measuring, you know, body temperature across the hospital. You know, people who have a fever and people who are corpses will just level out, and as a result, you'll have a perfect, you know, temperature if you measure just, you know, for the entire hospital. So I think you really have to be able to, you know, just see the breakdown, and that I think really corresponds with what Jason is saying, because that will, you know, account for your experiments and more traditional ways of hiring.
Yeah, I think I agree with the experiments, and you have to try different things. They don't always pan out, but there's always collateral benefits that come with them as well. We did a Kaggle challenge, which is kind of a data-oriented, you know, problem that you put out there, with the first prize being an instant on-site interview if you won the challenge. The weird part that came up with it is, you know, we had competitors from around the world. We chose the top 50 competitors from their scores. More than half of them weren't even interested in interviewing. They're just like competitive data guys. You know, and they just like to win these challenges, even though there's no real prize for that. Apparently, there's Kaggle ratings and different things. But I think the big collateral benefit was that what we've heard anecdotally is that people are starting to understand that we're serious about data, and that's something that's important to a lot of engineers. And evangelizing that is probably more important than actually getting that one interview through the process. So there were a lot of benefits, even though the tangible result from how many interviews or how many hires we placed from the actual competition may not be there, but we're hearing a lot of great things. Very cool.
We've got time for one more question, so if anyone has something burning that they will not be able to sleep tonight if they don't ask, please. Okay. So then with that, I want to thank all the panelists tonight for coming. This has been a really great discussion. So thank you guys for being here. So you all are welcome to stick around. We got plenty of food, plenty of beer and wine. You know, interact, mingle, do all that good stuff. We'll probably do another one of these in early November. We're going to try to do them kind of once every couple months, and hopefully we'll get down to kind of once a month. If you have any ideas for topics you'd like to see covered, we did ethics last time, metrics this time. If there's something else that you think would be fascinating, sourcing, yeah, we'll definitely do one of those. Let us know. We'd be happy to work that in the mix, and certainly send us any feedback you have on these and how we can, they've already been great, but how we can make them even better would be fantastic. And again, thank you guys all for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's great.
Thank you.